We are live. Yes. Welcome to the Lovecraftian podcast. If you are watching live, let us know that you can see us and hear us. And if you're watching later, I'll bet you can see us and hear us. So, uh, yeah, we're going to talk with Paul Tremblay today, author of quite a few books now, but most recently, horror movie. So, welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, good
Even
to see you, buddy.
with John here.
Wow. Wow. So it is okay. This is how we're going to do
Yeah,
this.
no.
Okay.
This is what
All
we're going to
right.
do. Yeah.
How we're going
Uh,
to do it. Okay.
Yeah, why don't we have everyone introduce themselves? If you're new to the podcast, I'm Mike Davis, proprietor, and John. Why don't we start with you?
Well, I feel if you're the proprietor, I must be a visiting lecturer.
Yes,
Okay.
have some. Okay, all right. DeBronzo.
Mike DeBronzo. I work in architecture. I'm an artist, and I read a lot.
And Alan, history teacher.
Alan Hughes, teacher, artist, and new panelist.
Mark's here, but I don't think he's quite here yet. So,
All right. So wait, while we're waiting for Mark,
Yeah.
is DeBronzo the piano player or is Alan the piano? I feel Alan is the piano player,
I'm the
which
piano
means
player too.
DeBronzo is probably the bartender.
Oh, I
You don't
see
wanna
what you
let-
mean. Yeah,
You know what I mean? You don't want to let Pete anywhere near the bar.
yeah.
No, I fully admit I sweep floors.
Okay.
Yeah, Pete, you got time to lean, you got time to clean.
I
So I'm-
am particularly in charge of cleaning up the shitty water that's coming out of the bathroom.
Oh, I'm so happy we're live for that one.
At least you're clean shaven for it. Look at that.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about that before you came on. Pete is clean shaven, man.
Like a baby's bottom. When's the trial?
Let me go back to gallery view here. I want everyone to see this.
Jeez.
It is 110 degrees out, and
Oh, God.
everything just had to come off.
So your answer is get to shave.
Yeah, it's one of the answers.
Everything had to come off, and thus also the reason for the trial. Yeah.
Yeah, there's that.
I've
Yeah.
seen pictures.
I assume, I see conversation, so I assume everyone can see us okay, hear us. And, hey, it's Mark Rainey. Mark,
Hey, all.
you want to introduce
Paul.
yourself?
Hello.
We have teachers and writers here. Yeah.
Indeed. Mark Rainey, editor, writer of many scary things, and very tired geocacher. I was just out on the trail all day, and I needed to make sure I had a shower before I came in here. You people
I'll
wouldn't want
say.
to be around me. Yeah.
Is it hot where you are today?
Pretty hot. Yeah.
And
Muggy.
you're still geocaching, huh?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Yeah. We did a big one today.
We'll have to talk about that in detail sometime. That's probably good exercise too.
It is. And I get so much inspiration, from all
Yeah.
the, cool places we go. Finding weird shit. I
Yeah.
love it.
So Paul, thank you for sending this to me.
Sure.
Horror movie by
My
Paul
pleasure.
Tremblay. I have a complaint though. I can't be the only one who complained about this.
Uh-oh.
There is no. I've looked. There's no movie in here. There's no DVD. There's no Blu-ray. There's not even a
No.
VHS movie in here. So, yeah. But it's a great book though. It's a wonderful book.
Send it back.
All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Now
Mike,
I'm gonna
you-
keep it. Huh?
Mike, you remember back like in the 2000s, books
Not
started
that far,
coming out-
man.
books started coming out with CDs in the back, like
Yeah.
just music and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. So, Langan, I'm glad you're here. I'm currently running a poll. I'll see where we're at
This is
tomorrow
the
on
first
this.
time you have ever said that to me. Okay.
Yes. Well, it's a poll. Who would win in a fight? This is on my YouTube channel. Who would win in a
boy.
fight? John German Godzilla Langan
Mm-hmm.
or Pete the Thin Kid Tremblay? So
You mean Paul, the thin kid Tremblay?
yeah, Paul.
Pete.
Sorry, Paul.
Oh, Pete Tremblay. That's his alter ego.
Yeah.
Pete,
Paul actually
Paul the
works
thin
out a
kid.
lot. Paul does like 200 push-ups a day.
Really?
And I am just way out of shape. So I've realized that in the fight that's going to happen at the end of time between myself, Tremblay, and Laird, Tremblay he's currently the favorite. He is currently the favorite, which, I mean, how did this happen? What kind of a nightmare world are we living
It's
in?
not poor Laird
Mm.
right now. I know that.
No, Laird
Yeah.
is just Laird's. I mean, Laird's he's in his cave. He's like doing a lot of meditation. He's playing violent video games. He's trying to get his testosterone levels up, but it's going to be a little while, you know. So
Yeah.
if it happens right now, it's Paul all the way.
It
Yeah.
doesn't help.
any
It doesn't
way
help that I send Grady Hendrix every night to sit on his chest while he's sleeping.
Yeah, that
Plus-
would both infuriate him and weaken him.
If Hendrix was going to do that, at least he could have helped with the move too. You know, Laird's move.
He's not
Yeah.
that strong, actually. He's, you know, that episode of The Simpsons where Mr. Burns is like the Batman character and he just sort of slithers around people. That's kind
Mhm.
of how Grady fights. Yeah, like a scarf. Like an angry scarf.
Wow.
John, and for the record, I think the rest of us are generally pretty happy to see you here. Well, I don't know about DeBronzo, you know, but the rest of us are always happy to see you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
I like him
even
all
in
right.
my weekend state.
So okay, Paul, I really, all kidding aside, really enjoyed this. So this comes out
Thank you.
Tuesday, right? Horror
Yes,
movie
comes
by
out
Paul
Tuesday.
Tremblay.
June 11th.
Yep. Could you give the audience a spoiler-free synopsis of the book?
Sure. I'm really bad at making it quick, so it's probably
No,
a
you
little
don't
bit
have to make
rambly,
it quick.
But yeah, okay. In that case,
Fill up the entire hour with the synopsis.
excuse me. Yeah. So the novel centers around a film that was made, or at least attempted to be made in 1993 by a bunch of really young, early mid-20s filmmakers. You know, and it's, you know, low budget, art house, disturbing, pretentious, my favorite kind of horror movie. And then something happens on set towards the end that, you know, prevents, you know, a tragedy happens that prevents it from making it to screen. And now 30 years late, well, 15 years after that, the director released a few scenes online as well as a screenplay. And then 15 years after that, there's now like big studio Hollywood interest in rebooting the whole thing. And the story is being told by the man who plays the character. He's given no name. He's only called the Thin Kid. And again, not a spoiler, but the sort of the idea is that the book is being presented as the audiobook of the Thin Kid, where he's discussing his experience while on set, but also discussing his experience after the movie was made, going to conventions, and now that it's trying to be rebooted. And the other thing I would mention is that the entire screenplay of the original movie is included and sort of intercut within the book as well.
Yeah, it's like 3 different timelines. That's hard to pull off, I would think. Was it hard for you to pull off? Did you, or does that sort of thing come easy to you?
I mean, none of it comes easy to me, but
Being a math teacher.
yeah. No, I mean, it felt like the way it had to be told. So, like, you know, when it got hard, you know, I just sort of believe that no, this is kind of the way that it has to be done.
You sort of did a version of that in the Pallbearers Club as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in some ways, I think this book, is that my doorbell? I think this book has a lot in common with A Head Full of Ghosts. However, you know, also I think there's definitely sort of a lot in common with the Pallbearers Club too. You know, I never think of books, you know, as series or anything like that, but I always like to think of, or I try to at least take like a few sparks from the previous novel as a way of jumping off point into the next one. Because I mean, the Thin Kid and Art Barber have a lot of their physical descriptions are quite similar.
Right.
But you know, maybe this guy's his personality is a bit more of Art's evil twin, I suppose. But yeah, both also, you know, big chunks of both books do take place in the 90s as well, and have sort of Gen X concerns, shall we say? We're concerned. We're Gen X, like most people in here are Gen X right now.
Yeah.
I don't want to age too many of you guys. Maybe a couple of you aren't.
1993. In some ways, it seems like, you know, a couple of months ago, and in another way, it seems like what it is over 30 years ago. You
Yeah,
know?
absolutely.
And your protagonist is unnamed, and in the Pallbearers Club, that's not his real name either. What was the thought behind this one, though, in horror movie, keeping him unnamed?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I wanted to like really blur the line between him and the character further, the character of the Thin Kid. So,
Yeah.
what better way to do that than like not have him named? Um, and also that way I could imagine like I could imagine his name as being maybe another character. I don't know.
Uh, Guys, jump
From
in
from like the previous thing.
if you have any questions for Paul too. Feel free to jump in. But this is, uh, I guess, it's in the subgenre of cursed films books. Um, do you have any favorites? I definitely would list this in there. I'm actually working on a blog post that I'm going to post tomorrow. A list of 8 to 10 cursed film
Yeah,
books. Just to celebrate horror movie coming out. But do you have
sure.
any favorites that you've read? Of course, we got Gemma Files experimental film, but there are
Yeah, I
others.
mean that would certainly be on the list. Um, yeah, I'm cheating because I'm looking at a list, books to make sure that I say the titles correctly that I've named. Uh, yeah, maybe this is well, no, I would consider this a cursed film, somewhat sort of book, but Universal Harvester by John Darnielle.
I was
You know,
going to
he
mention that. Yes, I love that
yeah,
book.
he works, he's working in a video store and sort of finds like this, strange VCR tape that's left over. So it's not necessarily something that was produced by Hollywood, but yeah, it's funny, like a lot of his books, like I feel like off kilter the whole time reading them, and I find that like I think about them quite a bit, like after reading it, which is kind of fun. Last year's Burn the Negative by Josh Winning is a lot of fun. Um, I don't know if this qualifies, but Stephen Graham Jones's Demon Theory, which is the first
Yeah,
book
I
of
would think
his
so.
that I read. Um, that's how I sort of discovered Stephen's work. In that book, the first when it came out in hardcover from McAdam Cage, which is no longer exists, unfortunately, because they published a lot of cool stuff, and also unfortunately because that book's out of print. But in the hardcover, Stephen's got all these footnotes, and it's sort of like a little bit of what sort of Steven has been doing lately with his slasher trilogy, but like he's referencing all these different horror movies, and the and the story itself is presented as like this bizarre like treatment, I think, of a trilogy of movies. I haven't read it in a long time.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, I just remember really, loving that book enough that I had to write him an email, or, track him down and write him an email as soon as I finished reading it. And I want to give a shout out to Ellen Datlow's anthology Final Cuts. Man, that's a lot of fun.
Hmm.
Uh, maybe John can remember. I wish I could remember who wrote the Werner Herzog story. But
Oh, it's
man,
Brian Hodge.
Brian Hodge,
Brian
man,
Hodge. Yeah.
that is excellent. There's some great stories in there, and like including John's, which he makes me a terrible vampire. uh,
My lawyers have instructed me to say I have no idea what you're talking about.
yeah, that's
The
less a cursed
character.
film story though than like
Uh,
something from a film. But
well, I guess when I say
yeah,
the cursed film genre, just anything of that nature, a mysterious film, or it doesn't even have to be
yeah,
supernatural
yeah, yeah.
per se. You know.
I was gonna say, I mean, other people have observed this. Obviously, just within the last 2 years, I think we're up to like 5 published novels from the big 5 about featuring a cursed film. It's just kind of strange to have, so many come out within a couple of years of each other. Sylvia, I haven't read it yet, but Sylvia Marino Garcia last year had Silver Nitrate.
Right.
A week after my book comes out, Craig DeLuey's got How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive. Uh, I mentioned Josh's book. I think Christina Henry had something that's akin to a cursed film thing come out. So, I mean, I don't know. I love that kind of stuff. I mean, it's kind of neat just to think of like all these different writers tapping into something. And then, of course, you sort of ask why. And I know, I think for me, uh, I think maybe part of the reason why so many people are thinking about it is because fandom is just, with social media and everything, genre fandom in particular is really sort of, exploded. And, there's way more connection and contact between creators and fans. And some of that's good, some of that's bad. Um, so, I mean, it seems only natural to have sort of like, writing stories where like, oh, we were obsessed with this movie so much, we kind of want it to bleed into reality. I think that's sort of like this, secret, and speaking as a fan, like a weird secret
Yeah.
thrill that so many of us have. So I don't know. I don't know if anyone else wants to say that's bullshit or
No,
or
yeah.
comment or add to that.
Well, I'm a fan of the genre, and then I'm a fan of your work, and I was, when I saw that this was in that genre, I was very pleased, and I love the book. John, you have one too. I read
But
it
I think that
6 months ago. Novella. Langan, what was your novella? And then Pete, go ahead.
Uh, that's a great question.
I read it, but I can't remember
Altered
the title.
Beast, Altered Beast, Altered Me, which yeah, the Italians are bringing out as something like the Ring of the Vampire. They were like, hey, we're doing a line of vampire novellas, and would how about this? And I was like, oh yeah, that'd be bellissimo. And so yeah, that'll be. But they were like, oh, that title doesn't translate, so it comes out as like the Ring of the Vampire. I think in a couple months in Italian.
And they made him change his name as well.
They did. Now I'm Giovanni Trembloni. They were like, let's Pablo Trembloni. Let's try to see
Yeah.
if we can milk this.
Didn't you have one? That's not the one set in the cave near the end, though, right? That's what I'm trying to think of.
That's a story called Lost in the Dark.
Right.
Yeah, which is about this. Actually, I mean, there are like consonances, I guess, echoes with what Paul is doing, and in that it's about the reboot of this film franchise, and the film franchise was created out of an actual documentary film. These kids went underground and saw some crazy stuff, and the woman who was the director brought it to her mentor, and the mentor thought that she'd made a horror movie and was like, we can make a lot of money off this. And she was like, oh, okay. So and yeah. And so
Yeah.
then there's a lot of that same thing, or not exactly the same thing that's going on in Paul's book, but it is interesting. I feel, what was the Brian Macaulay one too? Curse of the Reaper.
Yeah. Yep.
Where there's one of the things a lot of these stories engage, right, is the idea of the reboot, of the remake, which simultaneously, right, we sort of see how these things are going on in the present, but then we also go back and see how they were created and how they come out of their moment. So there's this kind of tension as well. There's always a tension, I guess, in a narrative that is two time streams or three time streams between past and present. But this adds something kind of it's the particular quality to the tension here, and I'm not 100% sure how to define that exactly, except that it seems to me like, in Paul's novel, you have this object, right, which is this cult object, right? Like the only way that people know it is through the screenplay and through a few scenes that have been released, right? And this is how we know it as well, as through the screen through the screenplay. So we're getting it the same way, in the sense that the hypothetical audience back in 2008 would have gotten it, right? um and and so there's a kind of there's a lot of implied baggage, and in some ways, I think, not just implied but stated baggage that the characters who made that movie have. And then there's everything that's come after. What is it? It's like, what does it mean to have been part of a kind of cult project, like something that, like, um when and there this happens all the time, right? But there's a local club over in Poughkeepsie called the Chance, or used to be, and the Police played there on like their first tour, and there were literally 7 people in the audience, but everybody in the, in the surrounding area was at that show or knew someone who was at that show, right? It's become this legendary event, but in fact, yeah, there were 7 people there.
Yeah,
Anyway.
Paul, your unnamed narrator, that something similar happens
Mm.
in that story.
Oh yeah, yeah. The opening paragraph, the opening chapter. He's talking to a producer, and the producer claims that like his cousin or something knew somebody who was on the set, and he's like, no, you didn't. Our set was, we only had like 10 or even less people working on the movie. Um, yeah. I don't know. I lost it, but thank you, John.
Yeah, and Pete,
This
you
is
were, you
too.
were
What
gonna.
about the? Oh yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say Pete was gonna say something, but he
Yeah.
he introduced me to a book called Memento Mori: The Fathomless Shadows by Brian Hauser, which is on my list.
Hmm.
Oh
So
yeah. His King in Yellow book.
yeah,
Yeah.
you
Or
still there,
I
Pete?
mean,
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great novel. It's a great King in Yellow story, and it is about some uh, college students trying to make a film, and then getting sucked into film fandom, and then discovering film, and then discovering a lost film that's cursed. It's a really damn good debut.
yeah, Brian's a filmmaker himself and a scriptwriter himself and a film professor himself.
Yeah.
And I feel there's a bit too about like sort of zine culture, which is maybe
Yes.
something that's kind
Mhm.
of, do kids still make zines? Do people? I hope they do.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, they
But
do.
that's part of it too, is discovering this. Isn't it like a missing issue of this
Yep.
one zine? And yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. But Paul was talking earlier about the why we're seeing all this stuff right now with film. And we were talking earlier about how we're Gen X. And essentially Gen X is the first generation that has ready access to filmmaking capabilities.
Hmm.
First with Super 8 film, and then later with Betamax and VHS.
that's a good point.
And at the same time, the other thing that I think is happening is that we fandom culture and celebrity culture comes out of being just Hollywood and rare. And in the 70s, you start getting media cons where film stars will go to your town and major cities, and you can meet them. That was something that didn't happen before.
Yeah,
Not on the scale that it was done then.
Right.
And so I think what we see is like you get to meet people, and not just film stars, but filmmakers. Yeah, and this is kind of important because all of a sudden you're no longer a couple steps removed from the people that starred and made the film. You can get access to them, and you can hear their stories. And we're seeing a lot of those stories, their true stories, hitting the page. And then those can be mined for whatever. You couple that with the access to actual film technology, and that's really, really cool.
yeah. Well,
I don't know if I don't know if I'm just bullshitting here or if it makes sense.
or we're all bullshitting, but I think, yeah, we're that's a great point. Gen Xers are the first ones with that capability, really. Um, I'll have like I said, I'll have a post on the Lovecraft Using website tomorrow, and if you're watching this, I don't know, 5 years from now or whatever, just search for cursed films, and you'll find it, I'm sure. But before I go off of that topic, Ellen did that anthology that you mentioned, Paul, and then
Mhm.
there's the anthology Lost Films, and that's edited by Max Booth and Laurie Michelle, I believe. So, yeah.
Mhm.
Um, as I was reading horror movie, it seemed like there was maybe this is. I'm wondering if this is deliberate on your part, but uh, a theme over and over of inevitability or fatalism. The characters seem to keep thinking that way, that they're locked into this fate no matter what. Or am I reading too much into it?
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's certainly a question the filmmakers have, and the Thin Kid character certainly talks about. Um, I don't know. In one sense, I think I tried to do it from like the from the point of view of these early 20 somethings, and weirdly like I think there can be like a determinism because like you feel like your future is only like a few weeks old, or you don't you don't think about your future. At least I remember not thinking about my future much beyond like a few weeks.
Yeah,
And then you sort of like worry about it later. And then obviously now the Thin Kid's thinking about it all like 30 years later, and sort of like how, how has everything changed him? What has he become? Sometimes obviously when people say, we don't have a choice, that's trying to release themselves from responsibility. So I think that's in there as well.
Yeah. Hey,
Um,
Bridget, how are you? By the way, for those, are you still teaching math? You still taking some time off?
Yes, no, I went back to teaching in September. So my school year, actually, tomorrow's my last day of meetings. So yeah, I'm back.
Uh, inflection point in in horror movie. Don't try to bring us into your twisted math world. You know, I notice. But we're friends, but I don't think I've ever asked you how you went from what was the journey from teaching math to writing books and horror books and so forth.
Well, I mean, I first tried messing around with writing like when the year I started teaching. So
Yeah.
it was more when I went to math graduate school. I went like right at the start of falling in love with reading for pleasure for the first time, thanks to a Joyce Carol Oates story, Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been, and reading Stephen King's The Stand. So when I was up in Vermont for 2 years, Lisa was in Boston, so we did the long distance relationship thing. So I just had a lot of time to read books. So I just read all the horror that I could get my hands on. And after a couple of years, I'd had a weird itch to try writing music. I was teaching myself guitar, but then I also had this weird itch to try writing a story, and I did. It's sort of inexplicable as to why, but um, so for most of the mid to late '90s, like writing was, very much a hobby. Like I wasn't like super serious about it, but I was just trying it. But eventually, I figured I was a better writer than musician, unfortunately. Uh, and started selling stories like in the early 2000s and stuck with it. But yeah, I mean, teaching and writing have always been intertwined. So like when I took my year sabbatical, I was a little nervous because it's like, oh, I've never, I've never been a writer when I wasn't, I've never been a writer when I wasn't a teacher. If I
Right.
guess that's saying it right. Um, it turned out to be a very productive year. Like I wrote the bulk of horror movie during my year sabbatical. I'd started it in the spring of my last year teaching, or the year before I had a year off. But I finished it super early, and then I ended up writing a, a short novel, a middle grade novel as well. But I did find that year off, I really enjoyed it, but also there were times I was like, never been more stressed in my life. Just dealings with movie stuff, but also just me being in my head a little bit too much. So I don't know.
How, how so with a lot of more free time than you were used to, or
Yeah, well, I mean, when you're teaching, it's like a built-in part of your day where you're not inside your own head,
right?
where you're professionally being paid to worry about other people. I think that's a healthy thing. Uh,
Yeah.
for me anyway. So like, if and when I do quit teaching, I'm gonna have to try to scheme is how I may fill some of that void.
Um, there's a uh, there's a scene. I don't want to give anything away because I think obviously the majority of people watching haven't read this yet because it comes out on Tuesday. But there's a scene near the end of the book where you just really stretch the suspense out, and it's done very, very well. And I just wanted to, I guess, comment and say that it made me think of
Well,
the
thank you.
Alfred Hitchcock quote about the
Mm,
bomb under the table. You
right.
familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, he says it's something paraphrasing, but um, there is a bomb under the table and it explodes. That's surprise. There's a bomb under the table and it does not explode, and that's suspense.
Right.
And yeah, I guess it's hard to talk about that particular passage in the book without really spoiling
Yeah.
it. But
Well, yeah, thank you. I would say so that scene, which is in the screenplay, maybe I'll just say that. Like I think I've probably mentioned this before on other episodes that I've been on with you. Uh But like when I'm writing a novel, I typically have like a scene that I envision as like the carrot at the end of the stick scene to help me get through the rest of the book. Because I always write it in the order in which I think it's that the book is happening. Like I never skip ahead. And, even this book, there was a lot of jumping around with the exception of one little scene with the director that I moved up, everything else is in the spot, is where it was when I wrote the draft. So anyway, like there was a scene, even though I wasn't sure what it was going to be fully, it's like, oh, I really can't wait to write that scene. And that helps get me through all the hard stuff in the middle, where you're like, where you're just frustrated and questioning yourself. So I'm
like your
glad that
director.
scene's worked for you.
Yeah, well, like your director who wanted to in horror movie who wanted to film the whole thing in chronological order, which is not really how it's done in Hollywood.
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly that's a little bit of a conceit for the story to help hold to like the idea of what happens at the end of the movie. But like
Right.
I was really, when I had a draft, I did send it to some friends who have been done and who have done independent filmmaking. And my friend Brea had mentions like, oh yeah, I knew people who like directors who insisted we're going to film this in order. Like, I was very pleased, that she had said, oh yeah, this feels a lot like some of the sets that I've been on. I was a little alarmed too, to be frank, but yeah, I mean, you could just see like as a new, what's the word? Tyro. Sorry. Directors like, hey, we're going to make it this way because it's going to help us with our performances, which is both pretentious, but also makes sense. Like, I don't know. Yeah, film in an order.
Yeah, speaking of Hollywood, I caught that one scene in the movie. Some guy says to the narrator at a convention that you said this to me, and I'm sure other friends too, but that they someone said to you about Hollywood that they don't respect writers, so they're marketing you as a creator, not a writer.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly what it was you said, but it was
that's pretty much it. Now, when I signed up with my current representation, who was Howie Sanders at Anonymous Content, he had said that to me, like, I'm going to pitch you as a creator, not a writer, because no one out here respects writers. And I thought he was joking because he was a very gregarious kind of guy. But no, he he would say later, no, I'm not joking. Yeah.
It's just so strange because that's where everything starts. Whether it's a book, movie, any audio drama, TV
Yeah.
show, it starts with the writing. So just I don't know. That's Hollywood, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I mean, right. I don't know. I mean, if you really think about it, not that necessarily we need to be like put on pedestals. I'm certainly not saying that, but writing's a hard job, just like anything else is a hard job. And the idea that like a producer who, again, like I don't know what their background is, but it seems more and more that many of them, come from like a business school. Certainly, like a lot of the bigwigs and studios are all like MBA business folk now. Like, what could they possibly know about story? Or
yeah.
what could they, how could they possibly be more qualified than the director and the writers? I don't know. It's a strange dynamic.
Yeah. John, everyone, you got some questions or comments for Paul?
Yeah, I actually wanted to go back. I was thinking about that question about fatedness and I was thinking that part of what creates, I think, the feeling of fatedness in the novel, because I think you're right, there is this feeling of doom in the novel, like, oh man,
Yeah.
is the fact that the narrator, the narrator knows obviously what happened the first time around.
Mhm.
And so he knows how bad it got. And so I think that's part of the feeling of doom, right? Is just that, oh man, and for us, right, we're going to get there at some point. We're and then he also knows all the terrible kind of fallout from that. Some of which is directly related to it, some of which is not related, but just it happened. And it's I don't know, it's like when you look back at your own life, right? Things seem faded because that's what happened, right? It had to be faded or it wouldn't have happened that way. And
Right.
I think that the novel really does exploit that to give you this, yeah, almost kind of supernatural feeling, right, of fate or doom or destiny or something like that.
Yeah, it's definitely something that can make you think and think and think. I mean, I think about how I met my wife and so many, yeah,
Speaking of doomed, that poor
Yeah.
woman.
yeah, I know, right?
That's
Poor
yeah,
Danielle.
yeah, that's
But all the things all the dominoes that had to line up just perfectly for us to even meet. you know,
The
and
haberdasher was like, "Madam, this is a cursed
yes.
hat, and if you buy
Yeah,
this, your
I
life
don't
will
know
be
why I
over." And
went
she
there
was
because
like,
then I knew
"I
you
don't
would go
think
there.
so."
Yeah.
But my point is, we've all had those kinds of things in our lives, right? Where you look back and you feel that way. This is the way it had to happen.
Sure. Yeah, and you go back and pick at the sort of concatenation. Am I even saying that right? I'm not. But like all the decisions that sort of led to this weird Rube Goldberg thing that was this event that happened in your life, right? And, in particular with the movie, I was, as a writer, I was very interested in that collaborative process where this group of people, it's not just one person's decisions, it's all these decisions being made by this group of people trying to make this thing, this collaborative thing. And so not only that part of it, because we know something terrible happens, but like, you know, the other line that I was interested in is like, when does this collaborative project become more important than the individuals themselves, and they start taking chances? Like the movie, like the rabbit hole that started this book for me was, hearing Walter Chow and John Darnielle talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Um, so I just went into like I rewatched the movie, and like I ended up reading a book that Gunnar Hansen wrote about his experiences on set and how dangerous that experience was, both all the risks they were taking financially, but also physically. Um, with no real safety guards with when they were using the chainsaw. No, and that was just fascinating to me. Like, this wasn't, Texas Chainsaw, what certainly was not a studio made movie. They were making this because they were making some weird, fucked up art, and they were willing to go to some really great lengths to do it. So I was just fascinated by not only the individual mindset, but the group mindset. And then maybe the revert, because something terrible happens, what are those reverberations into the future after that?
What about, it seemed to me then in several, not just the fatalism aspect, but in several places in the novel, you're not just being ambiguous, which you always are, which I love, but breaking the fourth wall a bit. Um,
Like the Kool-Aid Man.
yeah,
Sorry.
something like that. Yeah. We stare and we stare, but make no mistake, he is looking at us too. He knows who we are and what we are, and we are afraid. And that that's from the screenplay in the novel. And
Yeah.
yeah, and then a lot of the scenes from the screenplay, their point of view, you know. So
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it was like the fun of getting to write like imagine myself as a angsty 23-year-old, and that person still lives inside of me, like writing a screenplay that he would want, and ask those kind of things. But horror on some levels always trying to implicate, oh, I think it is, or implicate the viewer or the reader in some level. So I really tried to, up that on the screenplay part of it, really tried to, suck them in and address them directly. Especially since, I say early on in the book that I'm going to break the screenwriting rules, or that Cleo is going to break the screenwriting rules.
the I asked you for a synopsis of the novel, but I would add to that to really, I guess, hook for lack of a better term. If you're thinking of buying this book, to me, what really, besides the fact that I love your writing, what really got me is at the beginning realizing that of all the original crew, this narrator, he's the only one still alive. And for some reason, that just grabbed me. I'm like, I got to find out what happens, and why.
So
Yeah.
that fits in with the comment I wanted to make is usually when you're telling a story from the first person, the reader gets to take some comfort in a narrative told from the first person because that means at least they survived.
Right.
And here you've been able to flip that on its because they know everybody's dead. You're able to flip that on its head and
Yeah.
create.
What's the
Yeah.
T.E.D. Klein story in Dark Gods where, Black Man with a Horn? Where he
Yeah.
actually, it's first person, he talks about that right at the beginning. What you just said, Pete, that
Sure.
usually this, you know, whatever happened, the narrator got through it and everything. But he says, in my case, though, it's not necessarily true. It's not necessarily even over yet. So yeah.
Yeah. No, and like I'm pretty upfront too, because I mean, this part of it was important to me. Because I mean, well, I wanted to write a horror novel, but like, I don't believe in cursed movies. And, the Thin Kid voices that at certain points. It's like, hey, I'm 52, you know, it's 30 years later, people get sick and they die. It's not that everyone who was
Right.
involved in the movie like died on the set. Um, and part of what was ringing in my ears when I was writing about this was, Shudder, the streaming service Shudder has a cursed movies miniseries of like 5 or 6 episodes where they discuss, they pick a movie that's supposedly cursed and talk about it.
Oh, really?
And just
I'll
about
have to
all of
check
them
that
end
out.
up, yeah. And I mean, it's well done. And I do like that it isn't as purient as I thought it was going to be, because I mean, these are real life tragedies that happen, particularly on a movie, something like they talk about the movie The Twilight Zone. And really, like, I think the people who make those episodes do a good job of saying it's like, hey, these are things where, especially if it's a big studio movie, they're spending 6 months to a year on set, hundreds and hundreds of people. Life happens. There's going to be things. It's not, necessarily, um, it's not something necessarily supernatural happening. So again, like to me, I found that like really interesting. Why are we attracted to a cursed film? Like, why are we attracted to that idea? Like, why did I want to sit down and watch, oh, why is Poltergeist a cursed movie? Or why is The Exorcist considered a cursed movie? Like, was the movie not good enough for me that I wanted, some weird craven horror part of me wants it to bleed into, into reality in some way. Uh,
Possibly
so I don't know.
wanting the
Yeah.
supernatural to be real. If the film is
Yeah.
indeed cursed,
Right.
then
Paul, have you or anybody here, have you ever seen a movie called Antrim? I think that's on Shudder, and it's about a cursed film, and the idea of it turns out to be a lot better than the execution, from what I can
Absolutely.
remember. But
Yeah.
it's about like a 1970s movie about a couple of people who are digging a hole to hell, and some filmmakers find a print of it and restore it to release it. But if you watch it, really terrible things happen to you
Mm.
after that. And now, I was just wondering if any of y'all have actually seen that, because I thought it was a great idea, and it's actually kind of cool to watch, but it seemed to fall short in some
Yeah,
areas.
I've seen it, but yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Where it falls short.
To me,
There's
it seems like somebody made a really bad 70s film and then came up with a really great way to market it.
I've heard of the film, but I haven't seen it.
I'm trying to think of the name of the one when we were talking about curse films and stuff like that. This before it's the one about Mile. It's French. They have like
Oh, yeah.
hey, can you remember the name of it? Because
No.
it was like a
That was
one-time.
better.
Yeah, it was a one-time showing of a movie. I'll look it up in a minute. And I think like the crowd goes insane or something. Something catastrophic happens.
King
And it's a
Yellow
one
type
time and it
stuff,
becomes
yeah.
a lost film.
Mhm.
So, but you can't get it right now. It's like I tried when I recommended that the next day I looked for it and it was off all streaming services. I think
So
Fury of the
For
Demon.
good
That's what
reason,
it's called.
sir.
But yeah, that's the title of it, Fury of the Demon.
sounds like it's a legitimately lost film then.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Paul, got a question from the live audience. The Beast You Are is such an amazing novella / poem.
Oh, thank you.
What inspired this free verse epic about a bleak world of animal people coexisting with a kaiju? Come on, everybody writes about that.
I'll have to do a shameless plug. I'll do a shameless plug first, but thank you very
Sure.
much. The trade paperback of that just came out this week, so it's now
That's why you're here. We want you to
available in a
do
cheaper
shameless
form.
plugs.
Yeah. No, so yeah, that I mean, I have a deep and abiding love for all things Watership Down. In fact, I just got the Black Rabbit of Inlay tattoo up here on my upper shoulder. And it's funny, when I first saw that film, I was like 8 or 9, maybe 10, but young. And I was someone who was terrified of all things he watched, except for Godzilla movies. When my father brought me to an old theater in Beverly, the Cabot Cinema, it's still there, to see a double feature. And he's a huge Tolkien fan. And so we were seeing the Lord of the Rings cartoon. Is that Bank and Rass? No, who made that?
Bakshi. Ralph Bakshi,
Yes, sorry, the Ralph Bakshi.
the
So that was like,
rotoscope one.
The one
yeah,
that was
that's why
just
we
the
were.
Fellowship of the Ring part, and that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the draw, or at least in my head, it's like, oh yeah, my father loves this. He wanted me, I've seen The Hobbit, that cartoon film, but then the second, I can't remember if that played first or second. It might have played second because it was the headliner. But I loved Watership Down way more, and I wasn't scarred by it or scared by it. Like I scarred my 8-year-old son with it when I showed it to him.
Scarred and scared.
Yeah, I remember, I couldn't have. There's no way I could have verbalized it then, but like I do think it was like, oh, even though it's like rabbits, I feel like I'm being shown like the secret truth of like what the real world is like, because I wasn't afraid of it. It's just something that I've watched and rewatched. So anyway, I've long had the desire to write some sort of anthropomorphic animal thing, and I had sort of the weird idea for the novella, but I was thinking I might write it as a short novel. So a couple. Watership Down with Toby Barlow's great novel called Sharp Teeth, which is Werewolves in Los Angeles written in free verse, and it's an amazing book.
It's a great book.
Yeah. So like those two things, like, oh, I want to write this weird anthropomorphic animal thing and maybe do it in free verse. And I had the general shape of it, like I wanted to have like a giant monster. But honestly, this is like one of the only time I've ever thought to myself, well, there's no way, Jen, my editor and my publisher would go for it. So I just kept putting it on the back burner. And then sorry, this is a really long answer, but when I pitched the
No, it's
Pallbearers
fine.
Club, they said, okay, we want the Pallbearers Club, another novel, another collection. I'm like, another collection, you do? And I was like, oh, another collection. It's like, I'll write this anthropomorphic animal as an original novella for the collection. And I did the thing where I didn't ask for permission. I just said, here you go. Sorry. My editor, Jen, was very funny. She was like, I have no idea what to do to this, so I'm not even going to edit it. Luckily, the copy editor was someone who has a degree in like folklore and folktale. So she basically took over the edits on that one and was a big help.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you, person who asked in the audience.
PhD&D is their handle. So, yeah, it reminds me of Pulver Joe Pulver would say, "You want to edit this?" I'm like, I can't edit Joe Pulver stuff. It's too, it's free verse, it's poetic. But for those who don't know, haven't read Paul's collection yet, the Beast You Are, I genuinely mean this. It's a great collection, and there are a couple of stories in there that I thought were among the scariest I've read in recent years. So if you haven't read it, if you haven't picked it
Well,
up
thank
yet,
you,
you
Mike.
really should. Also noticed in horror movie something that I don't know if this was done deliberately or not, but I liked it either way. Um, when you describe the young women in the book, it's you often, and it's just kind of a natural thing. It almost seems like that a lot of people do. You know, this beautiful girl, her husband, this beautiful woman, her husband is missing, and that kind of thing. Always describes them as beautiful or all this kind of thing, and there are no that's not assigned to any of the young women, the director or the writer in this writing at all. And just I, I don't even know if I'm saying this right, but that's
Mhm.
just I liked that it wasn't brought down to their physical characteristics. It was more about just them as people and what they did and their talents, you know.
Yeah. Well,
So
thank you. I don't think I've ever described any character of any gender as beautiful. Uh, Certainly not
except for
novel-wise.
Lincoln,
I
but
just
yeah.
sort of, yeah, of course. Uh, Actually, I did not like in the novella or the novelette that came out from Amazon in the spring, Jimmy Lang. I did not describe him as handsome. I should have.
I understand that's in the sequel, though. The beautiful Jimmy Lang that
Yes.
awaits
The
us all.
beautiful Jimmy Lang that awaits us all. Yeah, it writes itself.
It does.
He's plucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, women are always plucky, right? When men are never described as plucky. I don't know.
Mhm.
Recent books that you've read that you've really enjoyed. Have you had a chance to read?
Reading?
Reading,
Sorry.
yes.
Yeah.
Reading.
Yeah. I'm going to a list just because my brain is mush.
Have you had a chance to
Um,
read You Like It Darker yet?
Yes,
Stephen King's?
that was going to be the first on my list. I just finished reading it the other day. I do think it's one of his best collections.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I think all the longer stories are pretty more the stronger ones. Like, there's some like 10 pages and those are like short, quick, sharp shocks. But yeah, the um, Rattlesnakes is wonderful. The opening story, the two talented bastards, is really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Um,
It is.
yeah, and the
I'm
last,
50% through. I just
yeah,
finished I've been reading a couple of other books before I get back to this, but I just
and
finished
it's
the dream
yeah.
story, the guy who has the prophetic dreams.
Oh, that's a really wonderful story too.
Yeah.
It's whenever I read him now, it's just like, man, like like I don't know how he does it. It's just so simple just to fall into the whole of his stories and just it just seems so easy. I don't know, it's a good reminder for me, like to not just get up my own ass sometimes, like with like narrative tricks and stuff. It's like, why don't you just tell the story? Because I
Yeah.
recently I told John this at StokerCon. I was asked to write like a ghost story for a pretty cool literary magazine, and I sent them the story, and it got like way too weird, and they rejected it, which is I'm glad they did, because it was too much. It was too meta when it didn't have to be. So I spent some time this weekend rewriting it, and reading Stephen actually helped remind me of, okay, this is not why like you love story, why you love reading. This is a part of it, and it helps sort of reframe. I still have some weird stuff in it, but like it definitely
He
it helped in the moment.
he's still so great. This he didn't phone in this collection, and
Definitely
it
not.
just to think, I mean, we're not young, but he's been doing this since we were kids, you know.
Yeah,
It's just it's amazing and strange to think of it.
How
So,
old is he now? He's up there.
he's 78 or so, right?
yeah, yeah.
I thought he was older than that.
I think he was born in
Huh?
45 or 46, but I don't know.
I think that's correct. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know, like, yeah, well, I'll see, like, when I don't want to like bum people out, but like, reading the acknowledgments at the end, at times it sort of felt like he was like, not saying goodbye, but it was like, hey man,
Yeah.
like, no, we want to read the next story, which is, probably a curse, I think, to all writers too at some point. But no, I mean, it's amazing. And wait till you read the last story. And it's a pretty incredible thing that he, he's been talking about this, how like one of his one of his grandsons was going through like his old files and found like 6 pages of this thing that he'd written when he was 30 years old. And so now 45 years later, so I guess he's, around 75.
Yeah.
He took him 45 years to write that story. And it does all the king stuff, but still manages to be like a shock and a surprise, both like warm and really unsettling at the same time. Um, so yeah, I'm reading a whole bunch of short story collections. Laird Barron's Not a Speck of Light is amazing. Um,
Is that the Jazzercise collection?
yeah, the Jazzercise. That's why I sent Grady Hendrix to sit on his chest after reading that story. But uh, this collection, I mean, all of Laird's collections are brilliant. This one really has like a sort of like it feels like I would almost describe it. It's not a novel in stories, but it sort of feels like really close to it. Like there's just a lot of interconnecting tones and bits and pieces that the individual stories are great, but like the whole as a collection too, it's I'm looking forward to reading it again to see kind of how all that part of it works. Hopefully, if I get a chance to do that. I'm very lucky. I just got to start reading Mariana Enriquez's forthcoming collection. She's a genius. I've only read the first couple stories, but they're
What for those
fantastic.
just listening, what's the
Oh,
title?
sorry. It's called A Sunny Place for Shady People, and it's coming in September.
Okay. Laird's is coming in September too, and this is the first time I've announced this, but I've got to go ahead from Laird and from his publisher that at our table, Pete, at Necronomicon, we're gonna have, I think, 50 signed copies of Not a Speck of Light. Um, and when they're gone, they're gone. So you'll actually have access to those even before they're published, is my understanding. Because Necronomicon's in August. So
Yes.
Amazing.
yeah.
I'd like to announce that I'm going to purchase them all and then sell them on eBay.
Unfortunately, I have a client, because I still sell some books on the side, and I have a client in Britain, and he's like, the publisher for that book has not made it available for pre-order in the UK.
Hmm.
Would you buy me a copy?
Right.
Ship it. And
Well,
I'm like,
yeah.
yeah, sure. If I can grab one before they're all gone.
Well, here's my retirement right here, Paul. There, right there.
Oh yeah, definitely.
This is a sticky note that Paul included with the book with that, what's the painter guy's name? I always blank on his name.
Bob Ross.
Bob
Yeah,
Ross. You have a Bob Ross sticky note tablet. I love it, man.
It has nothing to do with the book, but I
No.
certainly have all these weird Bob Ross stickers that someone gave me.
No, it was just so out there. I tacked it up on my
yeah.
bulletin board. So
let me throw out two novels really quickly too.
yeah, please.
One is the second novel from Nick Medina, Indian Burial Ground. His first novel, Sisters of the Lost Nation, was more shaded more to crime, but it definitely had some horror elements in this. The story definitely shades more towards horror, and it's really great. It really gets into sort of the day-to-day life of, this indigenous community, where weird stuff's happening, and someone's dug up the bones of elders, and no one's not quite sure what they're doing with them. And then there's this terrifying guy who lives in a trailer that, like, the main character sort of goes to get advice, but that guy's mom goes missing. And there's all sorts of stuff happening. I'm doing a bad job of explaining it, but just really brilliant writing, a brilliant balance of characters. I was very impressed by Nick. And the last one I just read most recently is more, being marketed as a literary novel, but it's certainly, I would say, it's sort of like dark literary. But Morgan Talty, Fire Exit is the name of the book. So Morgan's is set up in, like, Penobscot, Maine, and his main character has a daughter who lives on the reservation, but they kind of have to keep a secret that the daughter isn't his kid because of, oh shoot, I'm butchering the name, but because of the blood quantum. Like, if if she was the daughter of a white father, she wouldn't have enough of Penobscot blood to be able to stay on the reservation and get, some of the things that come along with getting to stay on the reservation. It's really lyrical. It's really beautifully written, very sad, very dark, very interesting.
What are you working on next, Paul, or can you say?
Well, so next summer, I already finished the edits. I mentioned a middle grade novel. It's called Another. That's coming out summer of 2025. So it's like a 47,000 word short novel. Features an 11/12-year-old sixth grader as the protagonist. And in some ways it's not too much different than, my adult fiction. I mean, John always tells me I write like an 11 or 12-year-old anyway. So,
10-year-old.
Yeah,
10-year-old. Yeah,
so
with
I was
crayons.
overestimating my prowess. Yeah, I'm excited about that book. It's pretty creepy. I think maybe they're not really concessions because they weren't part of the story anyway, but it's not ambiguous. And, the main character is going to overcome it at the end. If I wrote the adult version, he would be subsumed by the weirdness that happens in the novel. But, if it's a middle grade, we got to let the kid live. Yeah, so that's coming. And then I have a novel due just about a year from now that I've barely started, and I'm kind of freaking out about it.
I love the regret with which you say the kid lives. I love that. I love the kid lives.
Yeah, one got away.
One got away from the boogeyman. Yeah.
Damn it. It's a kid's
Guys,
book, so it's got to have a happy
I'll see you
ending.
later.
See you, Pete. Thanks for being here.
See you,
Good
Pete.
to see you,
Thank you,
buddy.
Pete.
Anyone else have any more questions or comments for Paul?
If it's not too much of a divergence, I sort of marvel at you guys that teach and get all the writing and meet schedules and things like that, because it's not a job typically that you go to, you work your shift, you forget about it, then you go home and you get to do whatever. Do you have a rigid schedule or way to compartmentalize your methods of working, with since you said you're teaching now, right? Or
Yeah.
you have been.
I
So,
had been, yeah.
yeah.
Um, I was going to sort of joke and say, well, I kind of do that. My pat joke is I'm sort of a half-assed teacher. But I don't know. I mean, so like I teach math for one thing, so I'm still like tired at the end of the day, but I also feel like it's not the same. I didn't exhaust like the writing muscle or the writing brain, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
when I was a much younger writer, I was much better at uh I mean, I still do, but like when I first was getting serious about writing, like if I had 45 minutes, if it was at school free, I would use it for writing. If the kids were taking a quiz, sometimes I would write. They could have been cheating their asses off. I had no idea. So in the early going, it was a wonderful lesson for me to be like, okay, like I can't wait around and have like, writing rituals. People ask, oh, what are your writing rituals? Like I don't. I sit down and I write because this is the time that I have. Like I'm a parent, I'm a teacher. Like I can't afford to do other stuff. I mean, so that was like a good and invaluable lesson for me, which I fear I'm losing a little bit just because of the distractions of social media and stuff like that. Um, so like if during the busiest times of the school year, if I can squeeze in an hour a day, I mean, that's great. That's what I look for. If I can get that, 5 out of 7 days, that's great. 25 out of 30 days of the month. I mean, that's kind of just how like I go at it. No, obviously weekends and vacations, I get a lot more done.
Yeah. You ever sleep?
Yeah, no, I do.
Pete's really
Yeah.
good at getting a million things. He just left a million things done
Yeah.
and writing a lot of stories at the same time too. I joke around that he must have a clone.
Yeah.
Um, y- Question from
So,
the
I mean,
audience
also I
again.
would say
Oh,
like
go
really
ahead.
quickly, like,
Yeah.
I typically teach a rotation of like geometry and calculus. Oftentimes I'm teaching the same courses. So, I'm not like rewriting lesson plans every day. I'm sort of, I know the material so well, I can just kind of go in and present it. It's not like I have to read a book, that's being presented for an English class and then have to, do all that stuff. So, I mean, I do, the flip side is I grade a lot more homework than I think, English teachers do, like in terms of number of assignments, but like I can go through those like really quickly. So I don't know. It's just like I was able to just through sheer repetition, because I've been teaching for over 25 years, just
I
find,
I guess math
find what
would
works for
be
me.
different, wouldn't it? My wife's a high school English teacher, and each year and each part of the year, she's always teaching different books.
Yeah,
It's not a repetition every year.
right.
And yeah, I see what you mean.
I'm curious about John's answer to this, or Alan, or do you teach as well? Other guys in here?
John, do you write books?
No, I want to hear what Alan has to say. I think Alan's
No, I
actually a
just
good teacher. That's why.
Yeah, Alan's a history teacher.
yeah, it's how do you think so you've been teaching over 25 years, about the same as me. How's it changed, do you think? How's
Um, so I mean, I teach at a small private school too. So I mean, the first thing has changed. Like compared to when I first started teaching, our tuition is like crazy. So like when I first started there, we had a lot more blue collar kids, and now it's like mostly, except for like the scholarship kids, rich kids. So that's been a big change. It's I feel like the students have changed less more than just the parents, and the amount of parental crap that you have to deal with has changed. Uh,
yeah, I feel I had more time to work on other projects earlier in my career than now.
really, yeah.
Yeah.
You get a lot of helicopter parents, Paul.
No, I mean not so much, but I mean it's more like I hear from the nice thing about being a math teacher is like most of the time it's just like here's your kid's
Yeah,
average.
yeah.
Like I just hear the stories from like the English teachers, the history teachers who have to grade papers and give the students grades they earned that are harder to explain, like why this is a B minus as opposed to something like that. And the coaches, it's just people complain about, I don't know. We were talking about Gen X, but man, as parents, some of these Gen Xers are the worst people in the world.
uh, Another question from the live audience. Sarah says, wants to know, do any of Paul's students read his work? I'm not sure what grade he teaches. So
Yeah. So I typically, well, my school is 7 through 12. This year it was funny, like after being away for a year, it did seem like what's going on here. But usually my geometry honors class is, it's supposed to be a high school ninth grade class, but this year it was like half eighth graders and even a couple of seventh graders sprinkled in. So that was like a little bit of a shock, just dealing with the energy of the weird energy of eighth graders and seventh graders, you know, mixed in with some freshmen. Um, so like I don't think those younger kids aren't reading the books for sure. You
Mr.
know,
Tremblay, you're a writer? What?
yeah, no, I've got my walls are plastered with posters and stuff. So, you know,
Yeah,
they're
that's
brag walls for me. This is Mr. Tremblay's room.
nice.
Um, yeah, so the kids don't really come up to me very often, saying that they've read books. I know the AP writing teacher assigned a head full of ghosts a few times. He did it when my son was a part of his class, so that was a lot of fun. Occasionally I'll get kids, you know, they're interested, but not really. I mean, I shouldn't say that. That's probably not fair. You know, they're
Dan-
interested,
Danielle's
but
always asking me about, accessible books for high school kids. I'm always saying, and she feels exactly the same way,
yeah,
that reading shouldn't be a chore. It should be something that you enjoy. And if you're an English teacher and you assign books that the kids can't relate to, then they're just going to associate reading with being no fun.
yeah.
Yeah, and a head full of ghosts, I would think would be very accessible to high school kids.
Yeah.
Relatable and accessible.
When I do see the kids who read carrying around books, it's almost always, you know, high fantasy, you know, big, you know, George R. R. Martin or other big fantasy series.
Yeah. Uh, you're gonna hate this comment, but Langan, but Chaz says, "Hey, Paul, I love the way you and Langan and Laird all advocate for each other, support and champion each other's work." I'm not. John, do you champion Paul's work?
It's a word whose meaning has changed over time.
Elaborate or
No,
more.
I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, yeah, I've said this a lot of times, and so is Paul, and so is Laird. Like we first became friends because we read each other's work and we liked it. And there was I it's funny, I was thinking about this the other day, that in retrospect, what may have helped a little bit was that we used to go to this convention called ReaderCon, which is a good convention to go to in July of every year, and as the name suggests, is devoted to reading. Um, but even in that kind of convention where there's a lot of, it's a genre, a sort of fantastic genres kind of conference, the horror kids are always the weirdos, right? I mean, it's always like, they would the science fiction and fantasy people would be arguing over, which is better, which is the true literature of the imagination, and we would be in the corner, whatever, like, gnawing on bones or whatever, and they'd be like, well, at least we're not like those freaks.
Yeah.
So I think that also kind of helped us to have this kind of innate feeling of or whatever you want to call it, of sort of solidarity with each other. And so what Paul was doing, what I was doing, what Laird was doing, what Michael Sisko was doing, a little bit later on, people like Nadia Balkin, like Stephen Graham Jones,
Olivia.
Livia Llewellyn, Nathan Ballingrud, a little bit later still, Victor Laval. Like there was this feeling that we were all kind of like in it together, and that we were, I mean, I think back to this essay that Peter Straub wrote about the first time he met with Stephen King. They were in London, or in England, I guess. I'm not sure if it was exactly in London. And Straub said something to the effect of, there was just this tremendous sense of like integrity to what the guy was doing. And that was how I felt about Paul, about Laird, about everybody else. I just felt like these guys, they're not phoning it in. They're not like, oh, well, they're not doing it tongue in cheek, which isn't to say it couldn't be funny, or but that they were doing it with integrity. And I honestly think that, and they're also a lot of fun to hang out with. And I mean, I remember when Paul got his first book deal for The Little Sleep,
Mm.
and we found out, oh, the guy's a narcoleptic, and Laird was like, he's like, Paul, I'm going to write a detective series too. And Paul was like, yeah. And he was like, yeah, it's going to be about a chronic masturbator. And Paul was just like, oh my God. And of course we chortled over that
World Fantasy 2009 in
yeah,
Saratoga.
and in Saratoga. Yeah. It was, but yeah, so I think that, and there were probably, I think about this sometimes, that we all grew up, like we were all born around 1970, a few years to either side of it. We all grew up, as did you, Mike, right? Under the shadow of Stephen King, you know, I mean, and there was, I was thinking about how when we were kids, right? Like there were certain movies like The Shining. Like I didn't think about The Shining as like a Stephen King movie. I thought about The Shining as, in some weird way, it was more like The Exorcist. There were these movies, these horror movies that were like at a different kind of level from Saturday morning, you know, old black and white Dracula or Frankenstein or whatever movies, right? There were these films that were in some kind of way really dangerous. It felt like, and the a lot of King and such, you know, those foil covers with the but they also felt like kind of dangerous, you know, and in not in a terrible way. Somebody said somewhere that if you were Gen X, your young adult literature was somebody slipped you a Stephen King novel,
Right.
like off you go, you know. So yeah, I think of all these writers as just doing these amazing things with this tremendous integrity. And yeah, I'm really delighted that Paul has found the success that he's found, and that Stephen has found the success that he's found. I mean, they've absolutely worked for it, and they absolutely deserve it.
Well, that brings me to a
Well,
question,
thank you,
Paul.
John. We're like Grady.
Well, I didn't say Grady was part
I
of that
know, I'm
group, right?
joking, I'm
I mean, Grady, Mallerman. We'll see. We'll see about them. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
Oh, we love Grady.
That
Poor-
that brings
poor
me to a
Grady.
question that I like to ask every creator that I interview, Paul, because it, it's a different answer for everyone, I think. The question is, what does success mean to you? What has to happen in your writing life and in your personal and professional life for you to feel like a success? And and do you feel that way? A lot
Yeah,
of us, look from outside looking in, say, "Oh, that's a really successful person in whatever they're doing." But it's
right.
different when you're inside. Do you feel that way to anyone? You know,
Yeah. No, I mean, I do feel successful, and I mean, I'd be lying if I said like, selling books, and making, more money, selling books than I ever thought I would is, it's hard to
money is a good
ignore
thing.
that part of it. Um, but I still, whenever it's because I was just asked this the other day for a different interview. And, I always think back to, John and I talk frequently on the phone, and we have for years. And, we've said to each other for a really long time now, like whenever we're frustrated or with what's happening, because success is, it's a moving goalpost. I hope it always stays as a moving goalpost. Um, that, we would often say to each other, hey, imagine yourself of 10 years ago with what you have going on now. Like, what would that person
Right.
say? Or, for a little bit of perspective. And I don't know, like, I mean, the truth of it is, look, I mean, John just ran off a whole bunch of names. We could rattle off a whole other bunch of names more of really talented, amazing writers who haven't that don't have the sales that I have or the sales of other people's do. So I'm really hesitant to tie success to sales or money made.
Oh, I thought you were
You
going to mention the names on the enemies list. Okay.
know,
Oh, you did mention Grady's name though. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I say that with like very much thinking about my own two children who are, approaching or already in adulthood, who are, artistic kids. And my son makes music and my daughter makes visual art. And, that's going to be I even hate to say it's going to be a tough road to hoe. I mean, here's the idea that, or the thing, and John talks about this too, is, in the age of AI trying to take over everything, the value of art is, for me is in the making of it.
Yeah.
It has, I mean, if that's not the case, then I'm going to stop. I feel pretty confident in saying that. Um, you know, as much as, as much as it feeds the ego to have like, great reviews and it's always more important to me that, someone like John likes my book, or the people that I care about. Like, I have like a list of in my head of like 4 or 5 people that really sort of matter. Their opinions matter, and everything else is gravy. Um, yeah, I mean, because the other part of it, I don't know, maybe because I'm always a pessimist, like, whatever ride I'm on right now in terms of like with, William Morrow, I mean, it's going to end at some point. Uh, you know, hopefully not just with my death, but like it certainly could end before that. Like, um, So John brought up ReaderCon. I think he was at the same talk. We'll mention Peter Straub again. One of the most amazing talks and really kind of depressing talks, but also weirdly uplifting in a way too, I ever saw was Peter talking about his experience with getting a Dark Matter published, and how horrible that experience was. And really, like, and I remember as a younger writer, I was like, even Peter Straub, like, what? Because he was talking about how he had a new younger editor, um, and he turned in what he wanted to call the Skylark, which he eventually, I think, published with Subterranean, like the full version of this book. But they just made him cut like all the stuff out and go through edit after edit. It was a really, long, like 40-minute talk, and he talked about all the trials and travails. And the whole time I'm sitting there, is like, even Peter Straub, like, they're telling him what he has to like cut out, for the marketing and the sales and all that stuff. And at the very end of the talk, Peter, in sort of his inimical way, just sort of looked and said, I feel like I just showered in front of all you people. There was a very warm, honest, and funny moment that, that certainly lifted the spirits in the room. But like, man, I feel like I was in that room yesterday. Like, I so remember that speech, and I take a, little comfort and fear from it, because that was Peter fucking Straub, and that's how he was sort of treated by the Big Five, sort of towards the end of his career. A genius writer. So, it's all
It's
fickle. Just the work is what's important.
And if
it's
you
worth
have,
remembering
yeah,
that Peter's last novel was never published. He wrote a novel called Hello, Jack. He turned it into his publisher, and they were like, we don't know what to do with this. And because it wasn't the sort of simple serial killer novel they were
Mhm.
looking for. And so it was passed around from editor to editor until finally, again, this young guy was like, "Oh, I think there's like a sort of serial killer novel in here. We'll let's work on that." And I remember Peter saying to me, "I want to show that I can like play ball. I'm a good guy. This sort of
Yeah.
stuff." And like he didn't want to be a prima donna and say no. We're going to do it my way. But that book has never been published. And it's still, as far as I know, the complete manuscript is with his papers at I think NYU. And there's you know I have resisted the urge to like reach out to his daughter and say,
Mm.
hey, is there any plans to publish this? Because her father hasn't been gone that long, and I feel that's kind of a dick move. But I will confess that I would love to read that book. I would love to read what he wrote, not
Mm.
the other stuff, but I would love to read that last thing.
Well, here's hoping it comes out. I mean, I will say, like, I
yeah,
hope I don't think this is, I won't say which titles, but like, I know Emma and Penguin, they are going to be re-releasing a lot of Peter's novels, and they've been asking for introductions from, like Neil Gaiman and Stephen King and stuff like that. So, all many of his 80s and 90s novels are going to be, back in print, which is great news. So hopefully that also means maybe we get to see that new novel too.
yeah. And
Yeah,
just
yeah.
FYI, a little bit after he died, you and you, John, and Paul Laird, and was Cisco there too? We did
No,
a
we excluded him.
did we exclude? I don't think we excluded him. Did a Straub, um, I guess, talk, and yeah, just look for Straub on the YouTube using
Mm.
YouTube channel.
But
But
this past, just as an aside, it's just
yeah,
like, but I have like a 2 hour commute, round trip commute to work every day. So I listen to audiobooks, and recently I was listening to A Dark Matter because I was like, this, let's see. I didn't really remember it particularly well. And what I remembered, I was like, that's an extraordinary book, even as highly edited as it was. If you've read the Skylark, it's right to the end he was doing crazy stuff,
Mm.
and that's not even the end. I mean, that was whatever, 2010 or something. But like he did not. It's like what you were saying about King before, Paul, that he just keeps doing it. He just kept doing it,
Yeah.
and until his health just prevented him from doing that. But yeah, I was sort of revisiting that book, and just thinking, man, this was not at all the book I remembered it being, which is often what happens for me with Peter's stuff.
Yeah.
It's all in the rereading, and then you're like, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. Which, I
uh,
mean, I'm that way a lot of the time,
I
let's
say that
face
all
it.
the time too when I read Peter's books. I'm like, wow, John is an idiot.
This just makes me realize how stupid John Langan is. Oof, let me tell you.
Well, also when you reread, you're a different person in a lot of cases, right? You read a book and you reread
Older,
it 5 years
angrier,
later,
yeah.
angrier.
Diabetic, yeah.
Exactly what I was going to say about you.
Yeah.
I like what you said about success, Paul, about comparing yourself to yourself, because when you compare yourself to other people, it's always apples and oranges. You know, it's never apples to apples, and it's kind of like uh, my son plays a lot of video games, and I think of it in life as leveling up. In video games, am I leveling up in life? Do I feel like I'm comparing myself to 5 or 10 years ago? Am I doing better? Hopefully so. You know.
I've got good news and bad news for you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know why I have you on, to be honest.
Me neither, man. Me neither. I mean,
Mike, would the you of 10 years ago have had John on the podcast as often as you do?
No,
that was
absolutely
because you
not.
had Fracassi then. You had Fracassi on, and you were like, "Oh, I love Phil Fracassi. He's my best friend." Yeah,
I don't
remember.
recall ever saying that about
Yeah,
Phil.
I remember that. I remember that. Yeah.
Mike doesn't have a high voice like that. He's good, very
Not anymore. Not anymore. He
baritone,
doesn't. He hit puberty. Yeah, but I mean, yeah.
Actually, I'm very glad that Langan's on the show a lot, but I don't, in all honesty, recall asking him to be on the show. He just would show up. So I was like, this is a good thing. Langan's on the show now. I'm leveling up.
I think it was like, I think Laird or someone was like, Pulver was like, Langan, get on here. And I was like, okay, Joe. A lot of exclamation points.
It was a contest, as I remember, between you and Laird. You made the cut. Laird didn't. So
I know. I think Laird just refused to play. I was like, Paul, put me in, coach. Put me in. And Laird was like, no, I'm not doing this. No.
So anyway, Paul, thanks for being here.
No, please, my pleasure.
Yeah. If you haven't pre-ordered Horror Movie yet, please do so. I mean, pre-orders mean a lot to publishers and writers. So don't wait till Tuesday. Pre-order it now.
One last sort of plug. The first editions.
Oh yeah.
Only have like the red sprayed painted edges. So if that's something that excites you.
Yeah.
Excites me.
Show me that again.
Red.
Isn't that with that toxic red, M&M thing?
Yeah.
Is that that red ball they're talking about?
Just don't lick the book, John. I know, like that's what you're used to doing, but
I never get to do anything.
Dipped in blood.
Hey, Paul, is it safe to assume that'll be on audio as well?
Yeah, and so for people like audiobooks, I did not ask this. The publisher really went sort of creatively. They went crazy with this book. So the Thin Kid is the main narrator, and then there's the screenplay that's written by Cleo. So that they have multiple voices for that.
Oh,
but
that's great.
at the end of each screenplay section, they're actually they're going to read it as is in the book, and then after the end of a screenplay section, they're going to pause and have like a dramatic table reading of that preceding screenplay section, like with a room full of actors.
Yeah, so well, I'll definitely want to pick it up on audio
cool.
Because I don't know if you'll believe this, but I am well past Generation X, man. And my eyes aren't what they used to be. So I really like listening to audiobooks. I walk a lot every day and listen to books every day. And in fact, I loved The Head Full of Ghosts. I don't remember who the narrator was, but she was great.
Joy Osmansky. Yeah, she I think she actor appeared in like some episodes of like Grey's Anatomy. No, I don't listen to mine very often because it's a little strange, but I did listen to that one, and hearing her do the voice of like 8-year-old Mary gave me chills. I was like, whoa, yeah, no, she does an amazing job.
I think what I admire about the next one, you were telling me it's the guys who did Pinky and the Brain. So that's just going to be, can't wait for that.
Speaking of leveling up.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, speaking of leveling up, like Stephen Graham Jones's newest book has Stephen King does some of the audio for it. Like, I don't know how much.
Yeah,
he's one of the audio readers. That's really cool. I don't know how he.
That's really great because if this writing thing does not work out for him, he can fall back on the narration.
He can.
Well, thanks for being here, Paul. Just before we go, if you're not a Patreon, Andrew is doing the dollar for dollar match thing again this month. So in other words, if I get a $5 a month Patreon, then he's gonna match that $5 for the easing. So that's great. Thank you, Andrew. And we have a lot of extra podcasts and a lot of other cool things on the Patreon. Among those things, you mentioned Nadia a little bit ago. I think you did, John.
Yeah.
A couple years ago, for example, this is one example of many. Paul and Nadia and I did a Patreon podcast about Lake Mungo, and that was a lot of fun.
That was a
So,
lot of fun.
and I scared Nadia with my Lake Mungo background. So that was the most fun I had on that. But yeah, thank you, Paul, for being here, and good to see everybody.
Yeah, thank you all. I appreciate it.
Yeah, when does your next book come out again? The middle school book?
Summer 25.
Okay. And what about the next novel? Is that about 2 years away?
Yeah, so in theory, 26.
In theory. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Right on. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Paul. We're out.